Canis, I suppose here we are next to Pat's grave in these, incredible ruins, and I suppose it's fitting so far as that Pat's only a few hundred yards from the local GA pitch. But you often speak of the commitment and the effort in the locality at the time, and Pat represents that, doesn't he?
Absolutely, there's no doubt about it that during the War of Independence, Pat was the leader of the Irish Volunteers in the parish, but it wasn't just Pat, and we have a statue in the village down here to Pat Walsh, but we could have had 3 or 4 statues because of the involvement of so many people from our parish in the Irish War of Independence.
So Pat was born on the 4th of May 1887, literally just 10 months since his parents got married. So his parents were Matthew Welch and Mary O'Neill, or Mary Nail as they say around here. Good match. She was from publican stock, so she came with a pub, so Pat Matthew married up. It was, I found it interesting that they only had the one child. Pat was an only son. And I kind of looking at the 1901 census, 1911, and saying, why is that? And Mary, initially when she was married, she gave the age that she would have been around 35, 34. Matthew would have been a few years older. But in the 1901 census, this is what she gives. But when you fast forward to the 1911 census, she is actually 10 years, or she actually moved on 16 years in advance. So she has in a decade, she jumped 16 years. And I was kind of trying to figure out, why is that now? What's going on here? And there's a few things. First of all, it was quite unusual for a man to marry a woman older than him. Very normal for a man age 40 to marry someone that was 20. Quite normal. I often feel sorry for the ladies. But other way around, not so much.
So Canis, I suppose it's very apt that we're on the GA pitch here, which is only a few hundred yards from where Pat was laid to rest. He had a very strong connection to the GA in the early days.
Absolutely, Ben. I suppose Pat was born only 3 years after the GA was founded in 1884. And I suppose Pat, while he wanted our country to be independent and free of British rule, he was also passionate that our culture would thrive again. And I suppose at the time in Ireland, English culture had more or less taken over in Ireland. And at the time in our parish, cricket was actually the most popular sport being played. There was a cricket club here in Dunnamaggin, there was one in Kells as well. So Pat was passionate that we would have our own culture, and certainly Gaelic games is certainly part of our culture. It's something that marks us as being different from the British culture of the time. So Pat was instrumental in the establishment of the hurling club here first in 1910. And Pat played on the team, the first hurling game that was played in Dunnamaggin in 1910 against Seven Houses. He was a very good hurler, and he also, when he wasn't hurling, he trained the local youngsters. And Pat at the time, they lived in the pub down here in Dunnamaggin, and they weren't hugely well off, but they certainly had a certain amount of wealth. So Pat bought the local youngsters hurleys, he bought them slitters, and he trained the youngsters here. If the Irish wanted to have a GAA match, they had to get a permit from the British at the time. So on the 20th of July 1918, the GAA Central Council met, and they decided that no longer were they going to seek a permit to play our own games. And they arranged what became known as Gaelic Sunday, which happened on the 4th of August in 1918. So on that day, Pat Walsh led out Dunnamaggin. He captained the team and led them out in defiance of the need to require a permit to play our own sports. Athenure was the opposition on that day. Now this wasn't without danger as well. I think it was up in Banagher on the same day that the police baton charged a hurling match that was taking place up there. And in the Phoenix Park in Dublin, 9 people were arrested for taking part in a football match on the day. But again, I think what's demonstrated there is the leadership of Pat Walsh. He took it upon himself that Dunnamaggin again was going to stand up, that we weren't going to be found wanting. And when the British authorities at the time tried to impose their will on us, Pat Walsh and the rest of Dunnamaggin, they responded in kind and they wouldn't take it.
My father and uncle were involved in the 7th column, old IRA, number 7, and they didn't say an awful lot at the time, but one thing my father did say, that the Tans raided the house one night looking for guns, and they probably knew that they had guns, the fact that they were involved.
I suppose right from the start of the War of Independence, the first thing that the volunteers in Dunnamaggin would have been involved in was acquiring weapons, and that was going to be needed to fight against the British in Ireland. And we have the incidents down in Kells in 1919 when Dennis Lahart was wounded very badly while acquiring weapons down in Kells. So certainly Pat was the leader of the volunteers at the time in the parish, but the people of Donegal certainly weren't found wanting for effort and willingness to sacrifice.
So Hoganstown is attacked in March. It is only the third successful barracks attack in Ireland, and it's the first successful barracks attack in Leinster. Now Pat, it's interesting his trial. He's arrested on the 8th. He spends Christmas he's brought to Callan first to the military, then brought down to Waterford. In Waterford, he spends the whole of Christmas in Waterford, and his trial is only at the end of January. So he's in nearly 2 months in prison. What's interesting about his trial, or his court-martial, I should call it, because Kilkenny's in military law by this stage, so it's the military courts that are, not the civil courts that are doing it. So he gets his court-martial. Is that usually what happens with the IRA guys when they go in, all the locals, they go and say, I do not recognise this court, or kind of like no comment, no plea. That's what happens. Pat goes in and he says, I'm going to plead not guilty here. I don't believe in any of this. But Pat then goes on and defends himself. And he acts as his own kind of barrister or lawyer. And I found this quite interesting because he is now questioning the soldiers who have arrested him in his house, and he's getting the better of them.
It just showed us the savagery of what they had to put up with from the British at the time. And it gave us a clear indication of why these men had fought for our independence to get us to a stage where we could have a life that we could determine for ourselves.
What happens is Pat's only released just after his 34th birthday, and he's released just as a flying column is based in the Donegal area. He's only released a few days before he's actually fatally wounded.
My father had been going to Knockbrack, where they were going to harass the police barracks there and across the loch. And on their way, passing through Haggart, which is down, he had an overcoat belonging to Pat Walsh on him, a good heavy overcoat, winter's time. And as they were crossing the road, a truck of tans came, and they couldn't get back, so they had to make a run for it. So that's across the River Glory there in Longs of Haggart. And he jumped over the ditch into the river. He got out the far side. He had been hit by 2 machine gun bullets as he went over the hedge. But he was very fortunate. At that time, they used to wear scapulars. And the medals on the scapulars, that's where the bullets struck.
So Pat's cut off. So the dike that they're coming down this field, Pat, Sean Quinn, Paddy Power are cut off. They then say, okay, we'll go north. We'll take the dike up to try to go up. They tried to hop the ditch then to come out over the dike, and the field is full of black and tans. They let off a volley of shots. Pat and Sean Quinn are hit. Pat's hit in the leg. Sean Quinn is hit in the abdomen. Luckily enough for him, Paddy Power falls back into the dike. He said one of the lads grabbed him, when he accidentally grabbed him and he fell back into the dike. And the 2 lads were shot, and Paddy was back in the dike. Paddy had a miraculous escape. He covered himself in reeds and stayed still, and managed to stay there for a good few hours till nightfall and get out of there and lived a long life after. But the 2 lads were wounded badly.
After Pat Walsh had died in the Fermoy Military Hospital, some of the locals here went to collect his remains in Cork. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how it must have been for him to bring his remains back here home to Donegal?
Yes, his father was informed on the day, the 18th, that he died. So he immediately contacted Ned Egan in Borskoob, and Ned would have got in touch then with John Hickey and Pat Holden, and they arranged a meeting of the IRA in the dairy here in Donegal that night. So at the meeting, they agreed that they were going to bring him home and have him buried in his own sod, so that was important to do that. They brought the remains across to the Donegal Parish Church here, just 10 yards across the road from Pat's house that evening. And they had it covered with a glass cover, so people were able to come in that night and file past the coffin, and many people did that. And earlier the following morning as well, which on Sunday the 22nd, which was the day of the funeral, they carried him anyway over the River Glory for the last time. Pat's house is right beside the River Glory where he grew up, and carried him up to the graveyard. And as they went in under the arch of the 13th century ancient St. Leonard's Church, they had a grave prepared for Pat just inside the church, which I think was very symbolic, and right beside a very old Celtic cross, which is 11th century as well, in Donegal graveyard.
Pat Walsh didn't want Ireland just to be free, he wanted us to have our own culture as well. So it wasn't good enough just to have our independence, he wanted us to have our culture as well. And he didn't want us just to have our culture, he wanted us to be independent of British rule as well. So that's what was achieved eventually, and it was because of the efforts like people like Pat Walsh that we managed to achieve our independence after the huge sacrifices of people like Pat Walsh. So again, really, really proud of the involvement of Pat Walsh. And I think especially these times with COVID after happening and when we didn't have GAA, we could see how much it meant to people. I think it's important that we think back to where it all started. And where it all started was with Pat Walsh in 1910.